Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Han, and I did some research into cultural factors that need to be considered when optimizing e-commerce platforms. So just some quick background on the global e-commerce market as a whole. Emerging markets really present a huge opportunity for businesses globally, especially westernized businesses who already have established investors that are looking to expand the business outward. In 2014 alone, the global market for e-commerce is expected to hit $1.5 trillion. And then for the first time ever, the Asia-Pacific region is actually projected to eclipse the North American market by over $40 billion. So the total market value of Asia in that region is about $525 billion this year alone. The questions that I really wanted to get at had to do with when you're launching a new e-commerce business in foreign soil, a country that you're not familiar with. What are the major cultural factors that must be considered in order to achieve success in that market? And then also, what potential pitfalls exist there? And really, the curiosity is, can you take one business model that is successful in perhaps the United States or a westernized country and kind of just drag and drop it or copy and paste it into another country with a different culture and expect similar or better results? Really, the watershed case in e-commerce expansion from westernized businesses outward has to do with eBay and their efforts to establish a business in China in 2004. So in 2004, they picked up their wildly successful business model, as we know, in the United States, and essentially just reestablished it in China without making too many changes. They invested over $100 million in their pursuits and had their eyes really set on total market domination. But by 2006, they basically called it quits and just left the market entirely. So when you look at those facts just kind of at a surface level, you have to ask yourself, what the heck happened? I mean, after all, she's Meg Whitman here. She's got on a nice power suit and looks like she's capable of leading a business. So were there mistakes made? What was it, an operational issue? What exactly was the problem there? Why couldn't they just apply their same business model elsewhere? What ended up being the demise of eBay was this guy. His name's Jack Ma. He's the founder of Alibaba and Taobao. Let's just let these photos sink in for a few seconds here. So before eBay came around, Jack Ma was a pretty successful entrepreneur. He had started Alibaba.com, an successful e-commerce platform in China. Their business model really had to do with helping Chinese suppliers connect with outside buyers or buyers from outside of China. He knew eventually that eBay was going to come try to replicate his business model. Instead of sitting around and waiting for that day to come, he decided to launch basically a preemptive counterattack against eBay's current business model and launched a consumer-to-consumer auction site known as Taobao.com. An interesting little tidbit about the name, Taobao can be translated to mean buried treasure, whereas eBay in Mandarin really means absolutely nothing. So at first, eBay didn't really think much about this little guy, and they just kind of ignored him, went about their business. But eventually, Jack Ma's company started gaining some traction and kind of raised a red flag in the executive meeting rooms of eBay. So a fierce advertising battle ensued. eBay poured millions and millions of more dollars into securing exclusive advertising rights for major online portals, basically the equivalent of Yahoo.com at the time in China. Jack, however, was a little bit more savvy about the local consumers. He understood that there really wasn't a difference between business owners and just the average individual, there was a far less significant delineation within the Chinese culture. He knew that rather than getting on the internet when they went home, that Chinese business owners just kind of wanted to go home and plop down in front of the TV. So what he did was employ a television-centric marketing advertising campaign that really blasted the message out there and reached far more viewers than any of the efforts that eBay was making. Eventually, eBay called Jack Ma into their offices and tried to make a deal with him. They realized that he kind of had a superior understanding of what was going on in the marketplace, and they wanted to try to buy him out. But Jack turned him down, and it turned out that he had a card up his sleeve. At the time, Yahoo was in talks with him and eventually invested $1 billion early on in Alibaba. So he was not worried about securing any financing for his business in the immediate future. So you have to ask yourself, was there more behind Jack's success? What did he know that Meg didn't know? Well, let's take a quick look at the academic research on the topic of e-commerce optimization, and let's see if maybe he knew some secrets. So one of the key studies that anyone looking to learn about this topic should read is by the team of Huang et al., and obviously I made a typo there, but they really dig into this concept of trust formation being a crucial element in buyers' behavior when they are deciding or either analyzing and then deciding what e-commerce platform to use. They put forth a couple hypotheses. One was that perceived process control is positively correlated with the consumer's trust in the platform. So that basically amounts to how much control over the transactional process that users have, and the greater control is more likely to lead to greater trust. The second hypothesis was that the greater amount of customization offered by a platform provider is positively correlated with the consumer's perceived process control. So really kind of intertwined things there that they wanted to test for. So they conducted a survey that garnered about 470 responses, and most of their participants were actual users of Taobao.com. They had posted a message on the messaging board there and gathered their participants that way. Essentially, they wanted to see what was at the root of Taobao's success, and they went straight to the source. So Huang and their team discuss a certain discord between the fundamental elements of Chinese culture and internet culture. They state that China is a nation that's strongly influenced by Confucianism, where the central theme is achieving and maintaining a sense of harmony among people. So this sense of harmony is achieved through relationships of an interpersonal nature, and that leads to China's collectivist tendencies. And then within these collective tendencies is where the root of trust is formed. So people trust others that are a part of their same in-group in China. The internet, on the other hand, kind of is different. You have looser personal connections, and communication is much more rigid and straightforward, whereas in interpersonal relationships, you can kind of control the context and meaning based on your body language and what you're saying and the environment you're within. So really, H1 there says that the more perceived control, again, and the greater amount of control over the communication within the process is going to lead to better results when it comes to e-commerce in this kind of culture. And as it turned out, the results from their survey actually presented significant support for both of these. So we know that there is some arrow towards the basis of trust needing to be formed within cultures before users even determine that they want to use a platform. So aside from just having a clever advertising campaign, Jack did a few other things that proved to be critical to Taobao's success. First was allowing the users on his new platform to have direct communication with the seller. So on Taobao, a buyer could request more information about the product directly from the seller via an instant message service. So keep in mind, this is a consumer-to-consumer site, just like eBay. Meanwhile, eBay controlled basically every aspect of the communication between the buyer and seller. The ability to directly communicate via instant message and obtain instant feedback rather than like having to send a message and then wait on the seller to return a message greatly improved the user's perceived control over the transaction. And it kind of shifted the balance of power a little bit. Furthermore, they were able to cancel their order all the way up until the time of delivery. So in contrast, eBay stuck with its typical model where buyers could only return a product through the negotiation process with the seller, blah, blah, blah. And again, here the power balance seemed to be in the hands of the buyer. And in my paper, I note that Taobao wasn't charging any transaction fees for the sellers on their service, which turned out to be a huge influence or factor in their success. So Taobao actually had a totally different business model on how they made money compared to eBay. So eBay had their transactional fees and they just kept that the same, whereas Taobao just had advertisements and they paid, and that's how they generated their revenue. So again, not having to pay a fee, not having to go through eBay necessarily to communicate with the seller. It all started pushing the needle in Taobao's favor. So finally, Taobao offered a highly customizable user experience as well. All points in the purchasing process, such as product search, product info acquisition, order placement, delivery, customer service, and reviews, were all offered through several different approaches and different entry points. For example, there were more than 5 different payment options and 3 different points of entry to write a review. Most impressive was the fact that, again, even after placing an order, consumers were still able to negotiate the price of the item. So it kind of just feels like a whatever goes kind of environment, but it was actually leading to a lot of success for Taobao. So I reviewed quite a few pieces of literature in order to derive some guidelines, and I'm not going to touch on all of them here in this presentation, but one that I did find particularly interesting was this study by Girdles, and it said that their hypothesis was that there are no differences in e-commerce purchasing among people from countries that seem culturally similar. So what they did was take participants from the country of Greece, actually the island of Cyprus to be exact, and then compared them with buyers in the UK. And they did another survey, asked a bunch of questions targeted at the subject, and they actually found evidence that rejected that hypothesis. I found that to be really significant because what that means is that when you're designing for broader regions, you cannot paint with a broad brush stroke. You have to go on a country-by-country basis and understand exactly what the influencing factors are in each market you look to enter. Even if they have similar cultural dimensions, don't let that misguide you. You really have to be granular with your search and not just take things for granted. So getting down to a few guidelines here, again, some of this comes from some research that I haven't touched on in this presentation, but is certainly in the paper. First one here being members of a culture that have a high uncertainty avoidance may be more likely to interact with a service if a friend or someone in their trusted social network recommends it. So therefore, designers should incorporate functionality that allows for users to easily share, discuss product information, or to see whom in their circle is already using the service. You see this on some sites. When you first land on the site, you're prompted to create an account. It already is showing you who within your Facebook friends is using the service. Guideline number 2, when you're working again within a high UAI culture, make a concerted effort to project a brand image that is not in stark contrast to that of the consumers' locally known and trusted companies. So you really want to err on the side of blending in as opposed to sticking out. And that goes from, basically the graphic interface that you're presenting, as well as the colors and overall aesthetics. This one starts to touch on what Jack did again. So when you're optimizing for a culture that is highly collectivist, significant features, transactional options, and business policies should be put in place in order to maximize the end user's perceived control over the whole process. So that can really range from like just simply offering a variety of payment options. For example, Chinese individuals, there's a much greater preference towards the cash on deliver, where you can just pay in cash when the goods are delivered, as opposed to using a credit card. And it goes from that kind of thing all the way down to like the fundamental approach on how you are building revenue for your business. So perhaps if you can lower the boundaries to fostering trust between those users by perhaps taking on not asking for money from them, but asking for money from someone else, perhaps advertisers in the case of Taobao, then that should certainly be considered. Another interesting little guideline that I came up with here, again, not based on research that I presented in this presentation, but U.S. users may be more prone to adoption of a mobile e-commerce platform due to social pressure or hedonistic reasons. So, basically kind of self-satisfying purposes. So Chinese users, on the other hand, may be more influenced by like the functional elements and even the expense of using the platform. So if they feel like it takes a long time to load and it's not really optimized for like a mobile experience, they're going to probably avoid that platform because they're going to have high data download costs. So when you're keeping this guideline in mind, you just want to, or when you're creating features, you want to keep this guideline in mind. It's really about the influencing reasons behind why someone would use a platform, and then also understanding perhaps potential hurdles. And finally here, designers should not assume that because two countries have very similar Hofstede dimensions and have geographical proximity, that the same products and services and features can be presented and met with the same reception. So businesses should attempt to understand the targeted country's culture on as granular level as possible. This starts with the hiring of locals as internal business leaders and should ultimately trickle down to every element of design and customer service. And I just remembered that earlier I said that the study between the Greeks and the UK, it was actually Greeks and Belgium individuals, so much closer in proximity. So even though you think that one country is right next to the other, they have very similar cultures, okay, we're done here. That's not the case. You've got to look further. So that's really the end of the presentation, and I hope that perhaps you've been inspired to read a little deeper on the subject. Here's a quick YouTube video that just came up the other day. It's an interview with Jack Ma with the Wall Street Journal. I found it pretty intriguing. Check it out. Thanks.